Okay, let's just jump right in because this is a wild one. We're about to look at a fascinating and you could even say an explosive experiment. It pits the world's most advanced AI against one of humanity's oldest and most debated systems for understanding who we are, astrology. It's a question we've all probably wondered about at some point, right? Are we some kind of cosmic code, a blueprint laid out by the planets the moment we were born? Or is it all just a beautiful, grand coincidence? Well, a researcher who goes by Aquarian Rising decided, you know what, let's stop arguing and start testing. And their tool of choice was a very modern oracle, Google's Gemini AI. The whole point was to see if this AI could find a real, verifiable link between a person's birth chart and their actual documented life. And let me tell you, the claim being made right out of the gate is a massive one. The researcher isn't just saying the results were interesting, they're calling it a breakthrough. The results, in their own words, were so powerful that they believe denying astrology's validity is, well, completely foolish. So yeah, we're not talking about some casual, fun inquiry here. The researcher is basically framing this as a direct challenge to scientific skepticism, putting AI in the role of the ultimate impartial judge in this ancient debate. And they are not pulling any punches. The idea wasn't just to explore if there was a connection, but to prove it so decisively that, according to the source, being skeptical afterwards would be like arguing the Earth is flat.
Okay, so how on earth do you even start to test something like astrology with an AI? Let's get into how they did it, because the method is actually really, really clever.
The whole thing was built on this really smart three-step process. First, they fed the AI blind astrological data, just a bunch of planetary positions, no names, nothing. And they told it, build a psychological profile from this. Second, they gave it a totally separate task. Here are a bunch of biographical facts about a public figure. Build a behavioral profile. Then came the final, crucial step. They told Gemini, hey, those two profiles you just made, they belong to the same person. Now, tell us how well they match up. And just so you know, we're not talking about your daily newspaper horoscope. They used a very specific, very technical system called the Fagan-Bradley Sidereal Zodiac. All you need to know is that it adjusts for the Earth's wobble, making it astronomically precise. This detail was super important to them to make sure the inputs were as accurate as possible from an astrological perspective. All right, now for the fun part. Let's get into the case studies. The researcher picked some really well-known public figures so we could see how Gemini's deep dive held up against real, fleshed-out personalities. First up to bat, Barack Obama. Now, based only on his star chart, Gemini came up with the archetype the guardian at the gate. Then, from his biography, it generated the confident conciliator. So the big question is, how well did those two line up? And what Gemini found was, well, it was pretty wild. For example, it linked his famous eloquence, his speaking ability, to a very specific astrological placement, and it even dubbed him the orator. It identified another planetary position and said, aha, that's the engine for his no-drama Obama persona, calling him the anchor. It even found an aspect that points to mental caution and connected it directly to his reputation as a super deliberate decision-maker, the cautious pragmatist. But here's the thing, a personality isn't just a simple list of traits. It's also about the contradictions, right? And Obama's chart had placements that suggested some intense, hidden aggression, which seems to totally clash with his calm public image. This is where the AI's analysis had to get really, really deep. And this is where Gemini did something pretty incredible. It actually coined its own term for this phenomenon, sublimated dominance. It basically said, look, the aggression isn't absent, it's just compartmentalized. It saw this powerful drive as being hidden in the chart's subconscious sector and argued it doesn't manifest as outbursts, but as detached strategic force. And the AI specifically connected this to his administration's use of drone warfare. So in the AI's view, that calm demeanor wasn't a contradiction of the aggression, it was the container for it. Okay, next up, the AI was given the data for J.D. Vance. And here, the archetypes were totally different. The Wizard of Oz from the stars, suggesting this powerful projection hiding a more vulnerable core, and the aggressive enforcer from his biography. And once again, the overlaps it found were just striking. Gemini flagged one placement and basically interpreted it as an intellectual brawler persona. It pointed to the sun's position in a so-called shadow part of the chart, connecting that to Vance's documented identity fluidity and what the AI called a hollow core. It even identified another aspect suggesting mental tension that it mapped directly to his US versus them or siege mentality worldview. But the biggest puzzle was Mars, the planet of war, being in Libra, the sign of peace. I mean, how could an aggressive enforcer have a peace-loving Mars? Well, Gemini's synthesis was really nuanced. It said his aggression isn't for the love of the fight, but is a defensive counterstrike to protect his home and his tribe. I mean, that's a perfect astrological fit for his whole hillbilly elegy story.
So, after analyzing all the overlaps and synthesizing all the paradoxes, what was Gemini's final call? How compatible were the stars with the biographies, really? For Barack Obama, after the AI reconciled all those apparent contradictions, it assigned a final compatibility score, and that score was 92%. That is a remarkably high correlation. And if you thought that was high, wait till you see this. For J.D. Vance, the result was even more striking. The final score came in at 96%. According to the AI, the astrological chart was an almost perfect psychological blueprint for his life.
And this wasn't just a fluke. The researcher ran this same test on multiple figures, including the famous scientist Carl Sagan, and the results were consistently in the high 90s. The AI just kept finding this incredibly strong link between these two seemingly unrelated sets of data. And this, right here, is probably the most critical takeaway from the whole experiment. The AI's initial scores were already high, but they literally jumped by 10 to 15 percentage points after it was asked to explain the paradoxes. It was the AI's ability to turn those contradictions into deeper psychological insights that sealed its confidence in the connection.
So, what are we supposed to make of all this? We've got an artificial intelligence, a machine of pure logic and pattern recognition, that looked at an ancient, mystical system and found a near-perfect correlation with actual human behavior. And that leaves us with a truly unsettling question, doesn't it? Does this whole thing reveal some kind of hidden human blueprint that's actually written in the stars? Or is Gemini just such an unbelievably powerful pattern-matching machine that it can find a compelling narrative in any data you give it? Whatever the answer is, this experiment definitely forces us to rethink the boundaries between code, consciousness, and the cosmos.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're wrestling with a stack of source material that is, I think it's fair to say, maybe the most challenging and audacious synthesis we have ever encountered on the show.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
Right. On one hand, we've got these incredibly detailed biographies of major global figures, cutting-edge psychological assessments. And then on the other hand, we have this, a deep, deep comparison of those same figures against their sidereal astrological charts.
It's a phenomenal package of research, and the conceptual leap it asks you to make is just massive. We're being asked to take this ancient, really esoteric mapping system.
Millennia old.
Right, and see how it aligns with extremely modern data science and behavioral psychology. And the sources themselves, they really urge us to approach this with a kind of radical neutrality.
They basically say, just let the results speak for themselves.
Exactly.
And the single most compelling piece of evidence, the thing that's really the centerpiece of this entire thesis, is the AI.
Gemini 3.
The fact that the world's smartest damn AI on the market, as the analysts call it, achieved compatibility scores that were, well, they were nearly flawless.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking psychological profile matches reaching up to 99% accuracy.
And that's when the AI tested these esoteric maps against verified, detailed biographies it was given later.
It's a stunning number.
It is. And the author, who's writing under the pseudonym Aquarian Rising, was very blunt about it. They basically said that to just continue with the default position of skepticism, given this level of data convergence, it's goofy in the extreme. That was the quote.
Yeah. Okay, so our mission today isn't to declare that planets dictate destiny. That's not the goal.
No, not at all. Our mission is to investigate why. Why can a system based on, 5,000-year-old celestial coordinates describe the nuanced, hidden psychological machinery of a modern CEO or an actor with such stunning, frankly shocking fidelity?
Okay, so before we jump into the individuals themselves, we have to establish the ground rules. We have to set the table, because this isn't the kind of astrology most listeners might be used to from, a newspaper column.
Yeah.
This is hyper-specific.
It really is. We are moving completely away from the mainstream common system, which is the tropical zodiac.
Which is based on the seasons, right? Like the equinoxes.
Exactly. It's a symbolic framework. This entire study, however, hinges on the Fagan-Bradley sidereal zodiac.
And what's the fundamental difference there? Why is that detail so important for the whole thesis?
Well, the sidereal zodiac is based on the observable physical position of the constellations in the sky. It's looking at the stars themselves. Because the Earth wobbles on its axis, it's a process called precession. The sidereal system is actually about 24 degrees behind the tropical system right now.
So it's synced to what you can actually see in the sky.
Precisely. If you think of the chart as a clock, the sidereal system is synced to the actual observable coordinates. And this is crucial because the AI's task was strictly archetypal analysis based on these precise physical coordinates, and it was paired with the Placidus house system.
So it only got the map.
It was given only the map, and from that, it had to synthesize a full psychological profile, completely independent of any initial biographical input.
Okay, so the core data we're looking at is threefold then. It's not just one final number.
Exactly. For each figure, we looked at 3 core data points. First, there's the overlap score. That's the initial compatibility. So how well does the raw placement map align with the public persona, the person we think we know?
Okay, and the second one sounds like the most important part.
It really is. It's the synthesis of divergences. This is the deep analytic phase where the research team and the AI has to reconcile these apparent contradictions between the chart, what you could call the internal pressure, and the actual life, the external action.
So this is the aha moment.
This is 100% the aha moment. It's where the real insight happens.
And then that leads to the third score, the final compatibility score, which tells the ultimate story.
Precisely, that's the rectified score. And it tells us how accurate the map is once you factor in all the complex psychological mechanisms, things like sublimation, compartmentalization, how people externalize their trauma.
So we aren't just looking at what these people do in public.
No, we're using the chart to explain the internal mechanism, the psychological cost, and the hidden engine that's driving all that action.
All right, let's just dive straight into the data that, frankly, caused this entire study to explode. We're talking about the near-perfect matches. These are the case studies where the initial esoteric map was already virtually flawless.
These are the ones that reveal the deep structural logic of figures that, often seem completely inexplicable to us from the outside.
And we have to start with the volatile world builder, Elon Musk. His chart started at a stunning 96% and then finished at 99% compatibility after the synthesis.
It's an incredible score. And the analysis immediately, right away, zeroed in on his very distinctive cognitive style, which the source material labeled the algorithm brain.
Okay, the algorithm brain. What's the mechanical signature for that in the chart? What are we looking at?
So we're looking at a hard aspect. It's Mercury in Gemini squared by Uranus.
Let's break that down. Mercury is cognition, communication.
Cognition, data processing, the mind. And in Gemini, it's operating at hyperspeed. It's all about data acquisition, duality, speed.
Okay, and Uranus?
Uranus is disruption, innovation, electricity, nonlinear thought, sudden breakthroughs. It's the planet of genius and chaos.
And the square is a friction aspect, right? It's tension.
It's pure friction. So this combination creates what you could call a high-voltage nervous system. And this specific combination is the astrological signature for his famous first principles thinking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the source material notes that this aspect basically forces the mind to reject reasoning by analogy. It can't do it. It must tear every single problem down to its fundamental, irreducible components.
Which explains the relentless, hyper-fast, and often erratic intellectual output we see from him.
And his documented inability to just switch his mind off. The circuit is always live.
I see. So the chart isn't just saying he's smart. It's describing the very specific flavor of his genius and how it operates. So what about the other side of him? That intense, almost compulsive ambition.
That's the core drive, and it's one of the single most powerful planetary placements analyzed in the entire study. We're looking at Mars exalted in Capricorn, and it's in the 8th house.
Okay, that's a lot. Mars is drive, action.
Right, aggression.
Yeah.
And in Capricorn, it's about structure, industry, discipline, long-term planning. Exalted just means the planet is functioning at its absolute maximum, most disciplined potential. It's Mars in its most effective form.
But the 8th house is the key here, isn't it?
The 8th house is the entire story. It governs transformation, other people's money, debt. But critically, it's about existential survival. Death. The highest possible stakes.
So the analysis links this placement directly to his constant pronouncements about, saving humanity, making life multiplanetary.
Absolutely. This placement is identified as the industrial warlord, and it's the engine for what he calls his demon mode. The drive isn't just for personal wealth or even simple political power. It's a disciplined, ruthless, almost compulsive need to focus on the long-term, high-stakes fight for species survival.
Is driven by the fear of civilizational collapse.
Which is classic 8th house energy, just manifested through this very industrial Martian action. It's a perfect fit.
Okay, but now we get to the synthesis part, and this is where it gets really complex. The paradox of the ghost CEO. The chart shows his Sun and his Mercury in Gemini are technically in the 12th house. How can the most visible man on Earth be astrologically assigned to the house of seclusion, the unconscious, things that are hidden?
It seems like a total contradiction, right?
Complete.
But the sources reconcile this by defining his entire life as dissociation as a lifestyle. Because his Sun, his core identity, is in the 12th house, he is fundamentally unknowable even when he's broadcasting his every thought continuously.
So he hides in plain sight.
He hides in plain sight by becoming a symbol. He merges with the cloud, the network of his companies, the X-feed. That 12th house Sun allows the demon mode to operate by disconnecting him from his personal human identity and letting him operate in a kind of trance state where he can focus purely on the mission.
It's a survival mechanism.
It's a mechanism for survival under constant, unimaginable scrutiny. And with that insight, the model achieves a flawless 99% alignment.
That is a profound resolution to a massive public contradiction.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pivot now to Robert Downey Jr. He's another figure who hit 95% initially and then 99% after synthesis. The chart for the restructured hedonist. It sounds less like a blueprint, more like a recipe for absolute disaster.
Well, that's what it is. It is the chart of the phoenix, almost genetically engineered for self-destruction and then a subsequent rebirth. His notorious early instability is mapped with terrifying precision to the nuclear reactor conjunction.
The nuclear reactor.
Yes. We're talking about Mars, Uranus, and Pluto all fused together in the sign of Leo, and it's all buried in his second house.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's break that down again.
Yeah.
Mars is energy. Uranus is chaos. Pluto is death and rebirth.
Yeah.
Total transformation.
Right. And all of that is wrapped up in Leo, which is ego, performance, the need for applause.
And then you stick it in the second house, which is self-worth and personal resources. That is a literal map of his public self-destructive phase.
It perfectly describes the terrifying creative and destructive energy that was, simultaneously fueling his brilliance and his complete collapse. The sheer intensity of that energy, especially the Pluto-Uranus fusion, was just too high for his vessel to contain in his early life.
Leading to the self-worth crises that defined his dark era.
Precisely. But the chart also, and this is crucial, it also precisely mapped the redemption mechanism, and that was the Saturn opposition.
Saturn, the great teacher, the master of restriction, discipline, consequences.
The cosmic breaks. And it sat directly opposite that explosive conjunction. The chart basically predicted that his self-generated chaos would eventually be met with an external force that would impose rigid discipline on him.
Which often came in the form of forced confinement or sobriety programs.
Exactly. And the synthesis shows he didn't cure that chaotic energy. He successfully integrated the opposition. He adopted external systems, Wing Chun martial arts, his structured marriage. These things functioned as a prosthetic Saturn.
He had to outsource the discipline.
He had to outsource the discipline his chart demanded in order to contain that explosive planetary energy. It was a structural solution.
A structural, not an emotional one, which tracks perfectly with his biography. Now, what about his public persona? That magnetic, hyperverbal, relentless charm and high energy. Where does that come from?
That's the moon in Aries in the 10th house. The moon is your emotional processing. Aries is fire, impulse, pioneering spirit. And the 10th house is your public standing, your career.
So his emotional life is just out there for the world to see.
It's visible to the world. The analysis notes that this placement ensures his hyperverbal, high-energy presence and that rapid-fire wit. And because his emotions are tied directly to the 10th house, his instability was always going to be public. It demanded to be seen. The high-stakes, public nature of his struggles was baked into the chart.
Incredible. Okay, finally, in this first section, we move to Robin Williams, the melancholic jester.
Yeah.
A profoundly beloved figure whose internal pain was, tragically well documented. His initial score was a bit lower, 90%, but then it jumps to 99% after synthesis.
And the chart here it's just chillingly accurate in mapping the architecture of his genius and his sadness.
It starts with his cognitive style, right? Similar to Musk.
Very similar. He has the Mars conjunct Uranus in Gemini. It's that genius aspect again, but this time it's applied directly to communication, to Gemini. The source material called it the wind tunnel mind.
A wind tunnel.
Yeah. This confirms that the hyperspeed processing, the rapid manic associations, the sheer volume of his output, that wasn't a performance choice. That was his fundamental cognitive operating system. His mind simply ran too fast, and the energy required an immediate, constant outlet.
But the tragedy, of course, lies in that famous sad-clown dichotomy.
Mm.
Where does the chart map that profound split between the public joy and the private alienation?
That's the core conflict. It's a contrast between his Cancer sun, the public father, the nurturer, the one who wants to make everyone feel safe and loved, and his moon in Aquarius in the 4th house.
And the Aquarius moon is?
The detached core, the intimate stranger, cool, scientific, almost robotic, observing humanity from a distance. And it's in the 4th house, which is his private life, his inner foundations. So while he projected this immense emotional warmth on stage,
Internally, he was detached.
he was observing, which perfectly explains the on-off switch that so many biographers and friends repeatedly mentioned.
The Cancer sun was just overloaded.
Completely overloaded by the emotional demands of nurturing the entire public. To survive, he had to retreat into that Aquarius moon to recharge, entering a state of emotional detachment, or what the sources called robotic solitude. And the synthesis revealed that his depression thrived in that specific, irreconcilable gap between his public need for connection and his private feeling of profound intellectual alienation.
So how did his chart, which has all this intense, chaotic Uranus energy, reconcile with the fact that he was, by all accounts, a generally high agreeableness person? He avoided direct interpersonal conflict.
The resolution was his Libra ascendant. The ascendant acts as your mask, your interface with the world, and Libra is all about harmony, fairness, pleasing others. So his high-voltage Uranus energy, which usually spells total rebellion, was completely contained.
Contained where?
In the aesthetics of his art. He shattered the structure of stand-up comedy, he shattered film genres, but he kept the Libra mask of high agreeableness in his personal life.
So the source details how conflicts, like the joke-stealing incidents, were handled.
Yes, via transactional appeasement. It's a perfect Libra solution. He would avoid the direct confrontation by simply writing a check. It allowed his internal chaos to only manifest creatively, keeping his personal world in balance.
These first cases really prove that the chart is mapping psychological stress and the effort required to manage it. So now we move into section 2, where the AI started with lower scores that suggested a pretty significant mismatch on the surface.
And this is where the deep analytical rectification process comes in. This is where that 7.2% average score increase happened, and it demonstrates how the human agent actively manages their internal chaos to present a stable public self.
That's the most fascinating part of this study, I think.
It really is, because it reveals the chart not as fate, but as a map of internal psychological work. And we have to start with Barack Obama. His chart began at 78% and then jumped significantly to 92%.
And the core conflict here was immense. His chart showed a loud, aggressive, high-ego Mars in Leo.
Right. The king of the jungle.
Yet his entire biography defines him as the confident conciliator. Composed, controlled, the absolute symbol of no drama Obama. How did the AI possibly resolve that fundamental contradiction?
The key was locating the specific placement of that Mars. It's in the 12th house.
Again, the 12th house of hidden things.
So the aggression is absolutely there, but it is sequestered. It's contained. The synthesis identifies this as sublimated dominance. Because it sits in the house of the unconscious, it manifests not as shouting or volatility, but as what the sources call invisible aggression.
Invisible aggression.
A kind of detached utilitarian ethics of action. Think about the calculated surgical use of military force, for example. He leads with an audacity that comes from that Leo confidence, but he presents a surface image of total modesty and composure.
So the immense calm isn't a lack of aggression. It's the structure that's required to keep the aggression hidden and functional.
Precisely. And that incredible composure is structurally supported by his Taurus moon in this system, which is in a position of exaltation.
And a Taurus moon is grounded.
Stable. It's the ultimate no-drama anchor. High emotional stability, slow to anger, very grounded. This placement supported his well-documented tendency as a functional introvert. It allowed him to retreat, to process stress internally, away from public view, which helped him maintain that calm exterior at all costs.
Okay, next up, Carl Sagan. The renowned scientist, global icon. He started at 88% and soared to 98%. The conflict here seems to be one of status versus servitude.
That's the central paradox. Why is the sun, which is your ego, your core purpose, in the sixth house. That's the house of service, daily work, the worker bee.
Not a house you typically associate with a global superstar who was, privately, something of a self-described diva.
Not at all. So how is this reconciled? The synthesis redefined the sixth house sun as the archetype of the workaholic savior.
The workaholic savior.
His immense fame wasn't an accident. It was fueled by a compulsive sixth house need for utility, a relentless drive to cure humanity of ignorance. His ego was tied entirely to the output of his daily work and routines.
So his private imperiousness.
Yeah.
His low tolerance for inefficiency.
That was simply the shadow side of a profound Virgoan sixth house perfectionist. He couldn't tolerate anyone wasting time in the execution of his mission, which he saw as a form of service.
That makes the work ethic the fuel for the celebrity, rather than the celebrity being the end goal. And what about his voice? That magnetic, almost spiritual quality he had.
That is the archetype of the cosmic evangelist, and it's mapped by Mars conjunct Neptune in Leo in the fifth house.
Okay, so Mars is the drive. Neptune is the spiritual, hypnotic quality.
And Leo provides the magnetic, theatrical stage presence, and the fifth house is creativity and self-expression. This combination is the ultimate spiritual materialist, a scientific showman who uses the language of awe and wonder and faith to sell cold, empirical data to a mass audience.
Let's move to Steven Spielberg, the anxious architect, 94% to 98%. His chart seems to be a testament to how anxiety can be weaponized into just monumental achievement.
It's incredible. The core engine of his entire career is mapped to his Sun and Mars in Sagittarius in the sixth house, and it's all opposite Uranus.
So Sagittarius is the big vision, the scope. The sixth house is that compulsive work ethic again.
And the Uranus opposition provides the constant humming nervous energy. The sources explain that this is the signature for extreme high conscientiousness, but it's driven directly by high neuroticism, profound consuming anxiety.
So he doesn't achieve despite his anxiety.
He fights his anxiety through obsessive preparation and colossal, overwhelming work. It's a classic sixth house defense mechanism against the chaos of Uranus.
And his legendary wealth and success. The sources say this is linked directly to an internal existential fear, the paradox of wealth.
This is a devastating insight, really. He has Venus conjunct Jupiter in the fifth house, which is massive creativity and blockbusters. But that beautiful pairing is squared by Saturn conjunct Pluto in the second house.
Saturn is restriction, Pluto is fear of loss, and the second house is money and resources. That square sounds like pure psychological pressure.
It is, and the synthesis argues that his blockbuster Machine Jaws, Jurassic Park, E.T. is what they call a fortress of capital.
A fortress.
It is a colossal defense mechanism he has built to ward off an internal existential fear of ruin. A fear mapped precisely by that harsh Saturn-Pluto combination in his house of finance. His success is a massive externalized prophylactic against an internal terror.
And the emotional engine of his filmmaking, those recurring themes of broken families and childhood wonder, that's clearly visible too, I assume.
It's the wound. It's the moon conjunct Chiron in the fifth house. The moon is our emotional need. Chiron is the unhealable wound. And the fifth house is creativity and children. This aspect maps directly to his career-long need to explore and repair themes of children and broken families.
E.T., Close Encounters, The Fabelmans.
The chart confirms that he uses his massive, commercially successful creativity as the active medium to repair his own inner child wound.
This theme of art as a psychological release valve just continues with Mark Hamill, the virtuous jester, 92% to 98%. His entire public life is defined by that split between Luke Skywalker, the archetypal hero, and the Joker, the avatar of chaos.
And the chart reveals that split as a necessary structural part of his psychology. He has a very public Libra 10th house.
Libra is harmony, diplomacy. The 10th is career. So that's the hero mask.
Exactly. And that public face is actively suppressing an aggressive Pluto-Uranus conjunction in the 8th house. That's pure chaos, transformation, the taboo. The good guy persona was mandatory for him, fueled by that Libra need for social harmony, which kept his considerable personal aggression contained and for a long time denied.
So becoming the voice of the Joker wasn't just a career pivot for him, it was a psychological necessity.
It became the essential psychological vent. Voice acting allowed him to safely access that massive, suppressed 8th house chaotic energy without ruining his public Libra image.
And the Virgo moon.
The Virgo moon provided the necessary utilitarian quality, the craftsman who provides a service. It allowed him to escape the static, restrictive role of the cultural icon of Luke and channel all that darkness safely. The chart confirms he needed the Joker to psychologically survive being Luke Skywalker.
Finally, Nicolas Cage, the alchemical performer. An 88% start, jumping to 97%. His chart seems to be, first and foremost, a cautionary tale about finances.
It is a near literal map of his financial life. He has Saturn conjunct Venus in Capricorn in the second house.
So Saturn is debt and restriction. Venus is wealth and values. In Capricorn, which is discipline, in the second house of money.
It is a specific, inescapable map of his IRS financial ruin and his struggle with debt. The tension is between his expansive, artistic, Sun in Aquarius ego and his deeply, deeply restrictive financial reality.
But the chart also predicts his legendary honorable grind, the whole VOD era where he just worked nonstop to get out of debt.
And that's the auteur synthesis. The key was his Virgo midheaven, which is your professional reputation. He has the reputation of being a technician, a craftsman. He couldn't stop being an aristocrat with the spending habits.
Right.
But he applied a blue-collar conscientiousness, which is classic Virgo, to objectively terrible scripts. He treated trash cinema as high art, working constantly to fulfill his need for disciplined, high-volume output and, work off the debt. The chart demanded discipline from that Saturn Virgo influence, and he fulfilled it even if the material was strange.
The sheer consistency across 10 wildly different, high agency figures, all of them landing above 92% after the synthesis. That is the central finding of this whole study. It really demands that we look beyond the specific placements and start to examine the systemic patterns that are emerging.
Yes, the core conclusion of the meta-analysis is that the Fagan-Bradley sidereal system consistently mapped the mechanism of conflict. It mapped the internal shadow self rather than just the external surface traits. It explains how a person is difficult or volatile or driven.
It's predicting the internal psychological architecture.
With a very high degree of fidelity, yes.
And the sources isolated 3 specific archetypal patterns that repeatedly seem to fuel this kind of high agency behavior. What were they?
Okay, so first, there's the genius aspect. We've talked about this. The Mercury-Uranus hard aspects, so squares or oppositions.
We saw this clearly in Musk and Robin Williams.
Exactly. This consistently predicted nonlinear logic, profound mental speed, and a kind of high-voltage nervous system that just required constant output. Their high achievement is often just a byproduct of a mind that simply cannot rest.
The second pattern seems to address the required stabilization. Because chaos alone, as we saw with Downey Jr., usually leads to ruin. You need something to contain it.
That's the workaholic savior pattern. Figures like Sagan, Cage, and Spielberg all possessed exceptionally strong Earth placements. So a heavy emphasis on Saturn or the 6th house. This astrological structure ensured that their internal chaos, their Uranus pressures, their Pluto, their Neptune, were all channeled into highly disciplined, high-volume labor.
The work became the required container for their internal madness.
Precisely, it gave the chaos a purpose and a structure.
And the third pattern dealt with the critical interface between their internal drive and their external interactions with the world.
That was the Mars filter. The placement of Mars, which is your action, your drive, your aggression, it determined the conflict resolution style. And it consistently overruled the person's sun sign in defining how they express their agency.
For example?
Well, whether it was Obama's 12th house sublimation leading to that invisible action, or Hamill's Mars in Libra defining his need for a diplomatic, loyal opposition style of conflict, Mars always dictated how they chose to fight or lead or act on their will.
Let's focus again on that rectification delta. That small average increase of plus 7.2% in the compatibility scores after the synthesis. I mean, if the chart is already, say, 88% accurate on its own, what does that little 7.2% gap truly represent?
It's probably the most profound psychological finding in the whole study. That small delta implies that the system is inherently accurate at mapping potential energy. The rectification process wasn't about correcting errors in the chart itself.
It was about explaining the human effort.
Yes. The primary cause of that delta was the sublimation factor. The chart predicts the immense internal pressure. The Mars in Leo, the Uranus trauma, the Saturn restriction, the biography, the life that was actually lived, reveals the successful release valve.
The art, the Wing Chun, the blockbusters, the comedy.
These are all externalized mechanisms that were custom built to manage the internal source code.
So the chart is the potential energy, and the life is the kinetic resolution of that energy.
Exactly. And art and career, in this massive data set, they function primarily as the customized container for internal trauma.
Okay, this is the moment we pivot. We're moving from applied psychology to, well, pure philosophy and mathematics. The analytical consistency across all these individual cases forces us to ask a bigger meta question. What if astrology isn't magic? What if it's a primitive but highly efficient descriptive model for a known mathematical system?
A deterministic, chaotic system.
Right.
The sources achieve a high 94% conceptual compatibility score on this very point. If we accept that consciousness is a complex adaptive system, that it's governed by underlying deterministic but ultimately unpredictable rules, well, chaos theory provides the mathematical vocabulary that astrology seems to be describing in its own archetypal language.
Okay, let's start with the math itself. How does a concept like a strange attractor, which is a core concept in chaos theory, how does that map onto something like a planetary archetype?
Well, in chaotic systems, the system itself orbits a mathematical shape, the strange attractor. The system never repeats the exact same state twice, but it also never leaves its defined basin of attraction. It's confined.
So the astrological archetypes, the Saturnian father, the Martian warrior, they function as these attractors.
That's the hypothesis. They function as these strange attractors for human consciousness.
Can you elaborate on that? Use one of our case studies.
Okay, take Elon Musk again and his Mars in Capricorn. That placement defines his phase space. He can exhibit chaos, volatility, or extreme discipline, but he will always be orbiting the central point of industrial aggression and structure.
He can't escape that boundary.
He can't. He won't suddenly become a detached meditative poet because his attractor confines his entire existence to that specific type of high-stakes industrial action. The human agent, retains free will, the specific path they take within that basin, but the chart defines the external boundaries of their possibility space.
So free will exists, but it's within a predetermined, mathematically bounded field. That's a powerful conceptual merger. Okay, let's address the second key concept, fractal time and aspect geometry. This is about wave interference.
Yes. If we start to view our internal psychological drives as wave functions, then the geometry of the aspects in the chart, the trines, squares, oppositions, they're simply measurements of constructive or destructive interference between those drives.
Okay, let's start with the easy ones. The trines, the 120-degree aspect.
Trines represent constructive interference. The waves flow easily together, they reinforce each other. This creates natural talent, flow states, ease of expression. It's what we saw with Robin Williams' innate verbal genius.
But the danger, mathematically,
is that this easy flow lacks regulation. It can amplify into burnout or mania or psychologically just laziness because there's no friction required to make it work.
and the aspects everyone fears, the squares, the 90-degree angles.
Squares and oppositions represent destructive interference. The waves crash into each other. This creates turbulence, tension, and very high potential energy. This is the necessary psychological friction.
And the source confirms this is why charts that are riddled with difficult aspects, the squares of Saturn to Uranus, for instance, often correlate with the highest levels of achievement.
The friction is required to stabilize the system.
Yeah.
It generates the immense energy output we saw in Spielberg, who literally used his anxiety, the friction, as the fuel for his work. The hard aspects are the engine that demands the human agent build a container for stability.
Finally, we need to address the hidden variable problem.
Bravo.
We are definitively moving away from the old medieval idea that planets send down, magic rays that cause personality traits.
We are arguing strongly for synchronization, not causation. The sources propose that the solar system functions as a stochastic clock, a massive, complex time giver, a Zeitgeber. The human agent isn't being caused by the planet.
They're being imprinted.
They are simply imprinted with the specific, highly complex rhythmic configuration, the sociological pressure of the moment they entered the system, at T0, at birth.
So the natal chart isn't a destiny map, it's a temporal index, a timestamp.
It is the source code for the initial conditions of that complex adaptive system. Just as the moon synchronizes the tides and biological cycles, the state of the solar system acts as a macro system, imprinting the microsystem, the newborn, with a specific rhythmic configuration. The individual is not paused by the chart. They are synchronized to a specific architectural vibration.
That conceptual bridge from psychology to chaos theory now allows us to enter our final and most specialized analysis. We're applying this entire framework to ancient history. We're looking at the Proto-Abrahamic hypothesis.
And this hypothesis posits that early Yahwism was not a rejection of cosmology, but actually a highly sophisticated astrotheological system designed for societal control.
And this historical analysis scores an 88% historical probability, which suggests pretty strong evidence that early Abrahamic faith monopolized cosmological timing rather than just rejecting it outright.
The argument is that the priestly class possessed a superior knowledge, which they then used to build a unified, more efficient system.
Okay, let's elaborate on the first pillar of this, the angelic mechanism, or what the source calls the software of God.
This hypothesis starts with linguistics, with the etymology of a word. The Hebrew word mazal, which today we translate as constellation or luck, fundamentally derives from the root word nozel,
Which means?
to flow down or to distill. The implication here is that the ancient Hebrews did not view the stars as competing deities. They saw them as pipelines, as administrative software. The mechanism through which divine will, originating from the one unified invisible God, flowed down to earth.
And the angels, the Malachim, they fit perfectly into this administrative structure.
Perfectly. They are the messengers, the executing forces of the zodiac. They are the distinct forces or intelligences that carry out the will of the invisible God. And the sources point to the Kabbalistic tradition, specifically the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. It's an ancient text that explicitly maps the Hebrew alphabet to the zodiac signs, providing the detailed source code for this entire cosmic administration system. So the knowledge was preserved and codified.
And we mentioned archaeological proof earlier, the mosaics found in ancient synagogues.
This is the historical proof that anchors the whole thesis. The presence of Helios, the sun god, and the full zodiac reel right in the center of ancient synagogues, like at Hamat, Tiberias, and Sepphoris. It doesn't suggest pagan worship.
No.
It suggests that Yahweh was understood as the invisible axis, the ultimate programmer, around which the entire mechanism, the zodiac, the angels, revolved. It was the architectural machinery of the state religion.
Okay, so let's move to the second pillar, the strategic advantage.
Yeah.
How did this knowledge function as a weapon or a tool for social dominance?
This is the conquest by information asymmetry model. The priesthood possessed a superior, highly accurate 364-day solar calendar. And this was a synchronization technology. It allowed them to predict and coordinate movements, military, agricultural, social, with a precision their neighbors couldn't match.
While the surrounding cultures, like the Canaanite city-states, were still operating on less predictable, more chaotic lunar cults.
Exactly. This superior federal time, as the source calls it, allowed the Israelite system to achieve massive economic and military swarms that their neighbors just couldn't predict or counter.
So the sources argue the conquest wasn't necessarily a series of massive military sweeps?
Not necessarily. It could have been a gradual, hostile takeover of the operating system, the calendar, the synchronization technology, the entire administrative model. The archaeological record often lacks the thick destruction layers you'd expect from a total military conquest, which supports this idea of a systemic infiltration based on intellectual superiority.
Finally, the great theological paradox. The shift from worship to reading. The Bible, specifically the Book of Deuteronomy, seems to prohibit astrology. If it was the engine of the priesthood, why the ban?
The sources argue that the prohibition was highly specific. It was a ban on the worship of the stars' astrology, idolatry. They were banning the bowing down to the mechanism.
But they were not banning the reading of the mechanism.
That function was reserved exclusively for the priestly class, who used it for prophecy and cosmic administration.
So the ban effectively protected the priesthood's monopoly on the cosmological knowledge. It prevented the public from accessing the control interface.
Precisely. The jealous god was, in part, a demand for a unified theory of physics and a centralized administration. By banning the worship of the interface, they protected their root access to the programmer.
And the famous Talmudic phrase, Ein Mazal L'Israel.
There is no mazel for Israel. It doesn't mean the cosmic mechanism is fake. It means Israel has root access. They have the ability to bypass the angelic middle management of the zodiac by following the Torah, which is the direct code from the programmer.
That reframes early Yahwism entirely as a cosmological administrative system where control of time and knowledge of the cosmic fractal meant total control of society. This has been a monumental deep dive. I mean, starting with a single chart's 99% score and moving all the way through chaos theory to this macro historical synthesis. The consistency of the data is, well, it's the central point.
The final synthesis is unambiguous. The Fagan-Bradley chart provides a precise map of the internal psychological pressure field, the inherent tensions we are all born with. The life that is lived is the record of the successful sublimation of that pressure, the customized architecture required to manage it.
So the world's highest achievers are not those born without chaos.
No, they are the ones who build the most robust containment structures for their chaos.
And that 7.2% rectification delta, that gap between the raw chart and the observed life, that's the measure of human effort. It's the psychological distance required to move from internal potential to kinetic resolution.
The chart does not predict a rigid fate. It predicts the specific, difficult tensions that a person must stabilize to achieve greatness. Downey Jr. had to manufacture a prosthetic Saturn. Spielberg built a fortress of capital fueled by his anxiety. Musk sublimated existential terror into industrial expansion. These tensions are not flaws to be cured.
They are the required fuel for the drive.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, as you try to digest this massive amount of data. If the natal chart is merely the source code for our initial psychological conditions, and high achievers are defined by successfully integrating and channeling their internal chaos,
Then what specific, destructive, high-friction aspect of your personality, your own Mars square Pluto, your hidden Venus in the 12th house, your Saturn restriction, what is the inherent required engine that needs to be harnessed, sublimated into a career or a discipline, rather than simply cured?
the journey to mastery, perhaps, is not eliminating your flaws, but building the perfect, strongest container for them. We encourage you to explore the concept of the esoteric tension hypothesis.